The day is August 8th, 2022, and I'm here from the Houston Asian American Archive interviewing Mr. Ed Gore. My name is Sarah Kong, and this is Mr. Ed Gore's second interview with HAW. So I'd like to begin with my first question. How did you first become involved with the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, and how did this idea for the project to get the Congressional Gold Medal arise?
Well, Sarah, I've been a member of Chinese American Citizens Alliance for probably close to almost 40 years. I think when I first started working with Chinese American Citizens Alliance, the CACA, they're a national organization formed in 1895 in San Francisco. And actually, the genesis of the organization was the result of the mistreatment of Chinese railroad workers back in those days. And so the organization started as a pipeline or a way for us to advocate for the civil rights of Chinese Americans who were part of the railroad effort. And of course, after the railroad was finished, many of them were just basically tossed out in the street without any work, scapegoat for many of the ills of the country at the time. So fast forward to today, we were predominantly involved with not only the civil rights, but also immigration issues, advocacy for Chinese Americans, and most recently, some of the issues having to do with the anti-Asian hate crimes that are going on around the country. So one of the things that happened when I first started this project, I was national president from 2013 to 2017 of the organization. And one of the things that I always thought about when I was a member, of course, is as people are members of any organization, when you pay dues, there is some expectation that you would think that there's some benefits behind being a member of an organization. So you say, well, what do I get for my benefits? What do I get? Well, if you think back, way back when we first started the organization, many Chinese were not able to get some of the basic benefits like insurance. For instance, health insurance and life insurance are not available to them because many of the mainstream companies and insurance companies were not willing to underwrite those kind of risks because they knew nothing about the Chinese. So these types of policies, health insurance and life insurance, et cetera, were not available to them. So CACA actually became its own underwriter, if you will, of things like insurance, health and life insurance. And even today, we still have a few policies on our books of people who are still living, whose families have policies on their relatives still. And as those who are passing away are now doing so, the family step forward and produce those life insurance policies, so we're able to give them those benefits. So, well, fast forward to today. Unfortunately, we find that there's fewer and fewer opportunities for organizations like ours to provide membership benefits. So when I, tasked our board with, trying to find ways to provide benefit, because I always feel like we ought to offer something back to our members. We just can't have them paying dues. And so one of the things that struck me was I was making visits around the country to the various lodges, and we have lodges over in about 20 different cities. And one of the things that struck me, of course, was the individuals who were the longest serving members, the ones who had paid their dues all these years, many of them longer, 30, 40, 50-year members, were the ones who actually ended up were the World War II veterans. And this included men and women, of course. And the interesting thing about that was these individuals were loyal to the organization and believed in its purpose. But over time, we never really had any more benefits for them after about, I would probably say, into the 60s. We no longer had any other benefits other than just being a loyal member. You paid your dues because they believed in the organization and some of the things that we're doing. And so I thought about this, and I think over the time that I was national president, prior to that, the Nisei and the Filipinos had introduced bills into Congress as well for their World War II veterans. And over a period of time, I would think it was about 8 years prior to ours, the Nisei got theirs, and in 2018, the Filipinos were approved. Well, I ended up meeting a general, Major General Tony Taguba, who's Filipino, and at the time that I met him, he'd already retired from the Army, but he was an ambassador at AARP. So his role at AARP was talking about caregivers for seniors. So he had an adult dad who he was taking care of at his home, and so I met him in Houston, and he said to me one day, he says, Ed, you guys ought to do the same sort of thing for your Chinese American War II veterans because you guys are the last group. And basically, that's true. The last group of minorities who served in World War II, who did not get this recognition or honor as well. And as most people in the United States do not know, is that many minorities served during World War II. This includes African Americans as Tuskegee Airmen, some of the Native American code talkers, as well as the Nisei and the Filipinos, and women as well through the Women Air Service pilots. So that became a kind of um, a rally cry for me to take this on. And so that's how it started as CACA. So across the country, of course, I had to get this approved by our board. And it's been a tremendous amount of work to go to the Hill, advocate on Congress, not only there in D.C., but of course here locally, you have your various senators and congressmen in each state. And I would say to you, Sarah, the biggest challenge, as you can imagine, is how many Chinese are there in all 50 states? Well, you can almost, narrow it down to maybe about 7 states here in the United States where there's any major populations. And you might say, obviously New York, you say California, Texas here, maybe Washington State, a little bit in Oregon, Chicago, Massachusetts, where Boston has a. So if you kind of take those, 6 or 7 areas, you're still left with 40, 45 states, up to 45 states that do not have a large population of Asian Americans, much less Chinese Americans in those states. So there's a difficulty in advocating for a bill that is so ethnic, centric that you have to wonder how many people in Montana are going to advocate for the bill, vote for it. But as things turned out, it ended up being a very successful project, which we were able to do in 2 years, one session of Congress, which is almost unbelievable when you think about it. But we had the right people helping us, meeting the right people, and all that. So that's kind of how this whole thing started.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear about. So you mentioned um, getting every state. So do you need representatives from kind of all the states to kind of vote yes on the bill, or what is the exact process, I guess?
Yeah,
That
for this type of bill, it's not a simple majority. It's actually, you need 2/3 of each house.
Oh wow.
So 2/3 in the Senate, it's 100 senators, you need 67 there. And in the House of Representatives, 435 representatives, so you need 2/3 of that. So about 290 you need there. The Senate is not as difficult because you can meet those individuals pretty quickly. So there's only 100 states, 100 senators you need to convince. And so we're able to get, I think, about almost 70. I think 69 or 70 is what the number ended up being. But the House is where it's most difficult because obviously you're not going to find very many Chinese in states like Montana and Idaho, Iowa, the Midwest, even along the eastern seaboard, North Carolina, South Carolina. And so you are just tasked with that tremendous responsibility to try to find those individuals. So what you have to do is really contact those individuals who work in each congressional member's office who have a military background.
Mm.
So the key for us was actually being able to find Chinese American general officers, those who are rear admirals and generals who were Chinese Americans, retired, who could help us walk the Hill and advocate. And so I think that was the real secret behind why the bill was able to pass, because we were able to reach some of those people that in each congressional office, most of them have what they call a military liaison. In other words, someone who's already in the military, whether in the Navy, Army, military, Marines, Coast Guard, who actually are staffed within the congressperson's office. So they get to learn about how Congress works and what they're able to do in the military. Obviously, you know that the military has a significant budget, in the nation as well. So
Right.
it behooves all of them to know each other very well. So it helps to have that military liaison working in the congressperson's office that we're able to talk to about this particular bill. And as you can imagine, most people don't even recognize or even have heard of Chinese Americans serving
Right.
in not only World War II, but World War I and the Civil War, going all the way back there. So it's a new phenomenon in a way. I don't know if you have any relatives of yours that served in the military,
Mm.
but it's very unusual today. And I think I've looked at some of the numbers, and even today, there's the military only is being all volunteer. there's still only about 5% of the military that has Asian Americans, and most are actually not Chinese. Most today, Asian Americans who serve in the military on a volunteer basis are Filipinos, Vietnamese, and just a few others, Korean as well. So don't have too many Chinese serving anymore in the military.
Yeah, so I researched because when during school, of course, I feel like so I went to a public high school in Texas, but I feel like this kind of stuff wasn't really in our textbooks. So
Right.
when was the first time that you kind of learned about the achievements of Chinese Americans? Was that when you were serving as president of CICA or
Um,
earlier?
I think the only thing that I learned in public school, and I live in Houston, so I'm HISD,
Mhm.
was probably things like the Great Wall of China, the Opium Wars. Um, not much at all about anything of World War II service, not anything about life of the Chinese, the contributions of Chinese, and of course there's a lot of history behind what Chinese have contributed to the country. Not just in the last 25 to 40, 50 years, but probably going all the way back to like there was no mention of what's the big thing that we've done. Well, the Transcontinental Railroad, right? I mean, I'll bet you very few people mentioned the fact that the Transcontinental Railroad was built by Chinese through Chinese labor, where both the Chinese and the Irish collaborated. One started from the East Coast, the Irish, and the Chinese started from the West Coast. And it turns out that what I've learned is that there was a lot of engineering feats that the Chinese were able to bring over from where they were builders and constructors in China, and more than anything else, kind of their ingenuity actually of building. So I've been able to take an exhibit of the Transcontinental Railroad. There's about an 80 panel exhibit, and it does talk about all of the various accomplishments engineering wise that led them to what did they do? They went through the most treacherous parts of the country back
Right.
then, through mountains, through across valleys and extreme cold and extreme heat to kind of build that section of railroad that was very successful. So that's the other area that probably was an accomplishment that really historically no one talks about,
Mhm.
and it's really kind of a shame in a way because even some of the pictures that they showed back when the railroad was built and completed don't show any Chinese in those pictures. They're all Caucasians in those pictures. It's typical when it happens. They're not going to have very many pictures. So they have reconstructed, I guess, or reenacted some of those photos now to
Mm.
have Chinese there in period costume to reenact that whole Transcontinental Railroad. So did you read anything about that when you were going through school? Anything about the
Yeah,
railroad?
yeah, I think that was maybe one of the few mentions of Chinese Americans in our history textbooks, like building the railroad. But yeah, just a very brief. Well,
Yeah, few paragraphs and you're done.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I've also seen that, so Chinese American men and women were served in like every theater of World War II.
Hmm.
And at a time, especially when many of them faced discrimination and other barriers.
Correct.
So can you tell us a little about kind of their achievements during World War II? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think in World War II, what you found is that a lot of Chinese, if I can just drop back a second here, we know that we estimate about approximately 20,000 served during World War II out of a census population back in 1940 of about 100,000. So 20%, which is a very, very high number. Usually that number is around 3 or 4% of any population or any ethnic group to serve. But in our case, we had 20% of our census population actually served during World War II. So the thing about it is, as you kind of know now, the Chinese Exclusion Act was in effect during the entire time. Of course, the Chinese Exclusion Act was a result of all the things that happened to the railroad workers back in 1882. So all through that time, up to and including the beginning of World War I and II, the Chinese Exclusion Act was in effect. Well, what did that do? It actually said that no Chinese could enter the United States. There were some certain subsets of groups who could, but for the most part, Chinese were excluded from being able to come into the country. So what happens is that there are so many who were here already, and some, of course, were born here. We estimate about 40% of those who'd actually served during World War II were not even citizens. So, in other words, they could not vote, they were not able to get citizenship, couldn't own property. All those rights, if you will, that Chinese should have had but did not have because of the Exclusion Act. So when you think about that large percentage of people, why did they serve? You think, well, why should I serve in a war and get killed if they're not even going to allow me to become a citizen or own property? Well, one of the things that happened, of course, back in those days was that the Chinese came to the United States looking for opportunity. Of course, you heard about the Gold Mountain story, everybody looking for gold in California. And of course, some of it's true, some probably more wives' tales than anything else. How many actually made it in the real gold arena? So it turns out that these individuals really came to the United States to have the opportunity because they knew things were bad in China at the time. So you come to the United States, you want to prove yourself. So one of the things they did, of course, was serve in the United States military to prove their patriotism and loyalty to the country because this is where they wanted to be. There was no question about it. Not it's much different today. People who are can be citizens of many countries. Well, back in those days, they decided they were going to be here. They're going to prove themselves. So many of them, I would say, a large percentage of them, 70% served in the army,
Mhm.
and the other 30% were from other parts of the military. So 70% served in the Army or Army Air Force, the other 30% in the Marines, Coast Guard, Navy, Merchant Marines, other branches. So you can kind of see behind me some of the things and you mentioned earlier that Chinese Americans served in all theaters of the war, so both Eastern and Western or Asia Pacific theaters. So you'll see that um, if you look at the design of the medal, it actually represents every facet of the military and how Chinese Americans served. So if you look at, for instance, um, on your left,
Yes. Yeah.
excuse me, you'll see this faces of seven. There you go. Of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You see the seven faces. So those are all of the branches of the military that serve. So they serve in every branch of the military: Army, Army Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, etc. The one thing that makes us different is that we also recognize the Army nurse. So you see there's a female there. Excuse me. So we also want to recognize her because she also makes a significant contribution. We know that there were women Air Force service pilots, but they have their own Congressional Gold Medal. So in this case, we decided to honor their Army nurse as well. So every one of them served, proudly as Americans. And you see on the back side of the coin, so that's the front, the obverse, and the reverse side shows the various branches, and it shows the three major components of the war. So you've heard of the Flying Tiger. So there's a Flying Tiger right there, the P-40. There's a Sherman tank, and there is the USS Missouri, which shows that we served in land, sea, and air. So that pretty much encompasses everybody's service. We've had one Medal of Honor winner, Francis W.A.I., and he was in the Army. He was killed in action, and as it turns out, we've actually had quite a few Chinese Americans who served and were killed during the war. Most of them have not been recognized per se, but as it turns out, one of the nice things about our project, excuse me, is that we've been able to recognize some of the individuals who did not get the recognition they deserve. So it's one of those things where, whether because of a lack of recognition or they were not recognized, they were not, awarded the medals at the time, we're able to upgrade some of the medals that some of the individuals received during some of our efforts. So we've had some really nice Bronze Star medals. We have two people who served who has Army Rangers. So that's kind of a special unit right there. And we've had several people who were killed in Normandy. So yeah, so it's not to say that we're all drivers or cooks or laundry people, but we had many who were actually had heroic deeds back in those days.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear about. Um, so when you first got started, I guess what was the first step in getting the bill passed? Was it just contacting the representatives, or how did you
Mhm.
get started? Yeah.
Well, the first step is probably one of the more difficult ones, just trying to get uh, cooperation and collaboration in the community. That's going to be one of the hardest things you can find to do. And when I talk about that, it's predominantly trying to get everybody on the same page as far as how do you write the bill. It
Mhm.
requires a lot of research because you have to have justification
Right.
for for having this bill passed. So as it turns out, I think we had a committee of about maybe about a dozen people. And of course, with a dozen people, you get probably 2 dozen different
Right.
answers on how to write this bill. So it's always back and forth and all that. And that's probably the same thing that happens within Congress itself. When you have a building, whether it's for health care or whether it's for, research, like anything like that. That's the thing I'd say is one of the more difficult parts is just trying to get people to collaborate on writing what's important about the bill. Get the research correct because you want to make sure your information is correct as well. So you're obviously always contacting people with a historical background into World War II. Then after that, it's a matter of trying to locate the right uh, co-sponsors of the bill. So within both houses of Congress, you always need uh, four co-sponsors basically, two in the House, two in the Senate. So what it amounts to is you need a Republican and a Democrat in the House and a Republican and a Democrat in the Senate to become co-sponsors of the bill because each have to advocate in each house to get the momentum going. So you're trying to find someone who has a lot of history, a lot of clout, and someone who's able to advocate uh, for the bill themselves because it helps to have the right name and the right person do it. So that's the hard part. And then after that is trying to contact everybody. So how do
Right.
you find the right people? Excuse me. So that's the hardest part about trying to contact the people, and you have to go to everybody you can.
Mhm.
Um, so here in Houston, we have quite a few actually, as it turns out. So that's the most difficult part. Trying to contact and convince them. So it says you need 2/3 of each house to pass the bill.
Mhm. Right. And who were the co-sponsors for this bill?
Well, in the Senate, we had um, Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois
Mhm.
and Mazie Hirono of Hawaii on the on the Democrat side, and the House, on the Republican side, we had Senator Thad Cochran. And two interesting stories there would be uh, Tammy Duckworth, as you might know, is a veteran herself. She's a helicopter pilot. I don't know if you know she lost both her legs in a helicopter crash. So Tammy is part Chinese, part Thai uh, as a background, and so she was one of the major co-sponsors who kind of helped us push the bill through in the Senate. Thad Cochran unfortunately passed away about the middle part of the time we were trying to advocate for the bill. However, Thad Cochran was from Mississippi. Now you might think that's pretty unusual to have a Southern senator sponsoring a bill that is mostly for Chinese. But you might also know that Mississippi has quite a few Chinese
Mhm.
that live there, Chinese Americans. Many of them actually live here in Houston now. So what you found out was uh, Thad Cochran, one of his closest friends, was a guy that at the time was 103 years old,
Oh, wow.
and he was Chinese American, lived in Mississippi, of course, and his name was Pat Pang, Pang. And the interesting thing about Mr. Pang was somehow he and Senator Cochran became great friends, and so he signed on to the bill to become a co-sponsor because of his friend Pat Pang. And to show you how close friends they were, uh, one year, about 2 years before he passed, Senator Cochran had Pat Pang come to the halftime of an Old Miss football game,
Mm.
and they introduced Mr. Pang as a World War II veteran. Well, anybody gets introduced as a World War II veteran anywhere. It doesn't matter where it is. Everybody, is just enamored by the fact that not only do you have a World War II veteran, but you have a Chinese American World War II veteran. So everybody kind of goes crazy during the halftime. We kind of saw bits and pieces of that. So that was kind of a cool story behind why Senator Cochran sponsored the bill. Then on the House side, we had House Rep Ted Lieu from California, who is a veteran, as also he's Taiwanese, and we also have Ed Royce, Representative Ed Royce, who's retired now. But at the time, he was his congressional district is in Orange County, which has quite a few Chinese and Asian Americans living there. So he felt very compelled because he's supported many military bills in the past, and so he's more than happy to be a co-sponsor of this bill. So it wasn't as difficult, but you still need to know the right people to get to the right people to find the right people who will help sponsor the bill. And so we're always advocating for that. And all along the way, it doesn't matter what state you go to, you always have to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody.
Right, right. So the connections.
All the connections. It's always about the connections. And it's always about trying to find, who has the best connection to reach this particular uh, elected official. So.
Mm, yeah, yeah. So earlier you also mentioned the Filipinos and other minority groups
Mhm.
getting congressional medals. So did you ever talk to their organizers or kind of collaborate with them on how to get the congressional gold medal?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the nice thing about that is Joe Taguba, as I mentioned, he was very, very inspirational and became a really good mentor for me to work with Bill. I mean, there's one thing about some of these military guys, they will help you as much as they can and more than happy to tell you what to do even. I mean, because they're used to giving you orders, right? And so even I've never been in the military. Most of these guys figure that anybody who's willing to do this, they're willing to help you along the way. And of course, on the other side of the coin, we also had a very instrumental person helping us as well was a Chinese American two-star general, General Robert G.F. Lee from Hawaii. He's retired. And the nice thing about Bob was he actually had worked on the Nisei bill with the Japanese. And so and many of the things about Bob was he was part of that, what was before the 442nd, the Japanese squadron that was so famous, for having done so well in World War II. So all of his experience, all of Bob Lee's experience, and all of Tony Taguba's experience, um, I certainly called upon. Now, the other interesting thing I'll say is, as far as civilians goes, is that right here in Houston, we have the three people who I would say who are most instrumental in each one of the efforts of each one of the organizations. So on the Nisei side, we have another Houstonian, Donna Cole. Donna owns Cole Chemical, and Donna was very instrumental with the Nisei effort as well. She being Japanese, and then we had Christy Pozo. Christy Pozo works for Shell Oil. I think she's still with Shell Oil. Anyway, she's Filipino, and she helped on the Filipino project. So yeah, along the way, I mean, I had the experience of all these individuals to call upon
Mhm.
to find out about how they did it and what they did. And yeah, we tried to model as much as we could after them, and maybe that's probably why we were so successful in doing it within the 2 year period, because I think the Filipinos took at least 5, 6, 7 years, and Nisei about the same amount of time, which is a little bit unusual because uh, not so much the Filipino group, but I know in Congress the Japanese have quite a few elected officials, a
Mm.
lot from California, of course, and Hawaii. So it maybe it's a little bit disturbing that it took them so long as well to pass their bill, but finally got passed as well. So every bit of success we've had on our project, and I think Chinese Americans ought to be very, 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 very grateful for all the help um, that those two groups gave us.
Mhm.
And I think to some extent, Sarah, I would almost think that the Chinese were a little bit spoiled sometimes. When you get this thing done so quickly,
Mhm.
Few people seem to have, skin in the game because unless you work for something hard and long, like the Filipinos and the Nisei did, maybe their groups appreciated a lot more than our groups did.
Mhm.
Because even though, um, for the most part, the Filipinos and Nisei served in segregated units, the Chinese did not. Our Chinese were integrated into all units across the spectrum because they were not in. There was only two segregated units, I'd say, that Chinese served, and it was, I think, it was mostly only because of the language, and of course they served in China during
Mhm.
that time. But um, I would have to say that this one thing that I have a little bit of regret about is that the project was so successful so quickly. I think people thought it was so easy, and I
Mhm.
think that's the sad part to me about how I don't think that our Chinese community, while they're proud and happy to get this recognition, I don't really believe that they understand how difficult
Right.
it was to go through the work to get it. And like I said before, I can only thank those individuals that I met along the way and that helped with our effort to do this. And so I say this in all humility is that I don't want to say that the Chinese didn't contribute to some of the work that we did, but I think the fact is the heavy hitters and hard pushers and movers were probably some of our friends in the Filipino and Nisei community.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, so when was the bill finally passed?
Yeah, the bill was finally passed in December of 2018.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, almost one of the last things that happened at the end of 2018 before Congress closed the session. President Trump signed the bill at the very last moment. You may not remember, but historically there was the partial government shutdown about to
Oh,
happen during that period of time.
mhm.
So everybody's scrambling out of town, ready to leave. Okay, we're going to shut down the government or partially shut it down, etc. So he was able to sign the bill, so we were able to get things going at the end of 2018, and from 2019 till May 31, 2021
Mhm.
was really our major active push to register some of the World War II veterans who and
Mhm.
their families, who knew about the project and were able to at least sign up and register so they could get the no cost medals. The medals are one that we raised funds for. We called upon our donor community to step forward and help donate for the project because it's kind of the typical, I guess, Chinese way of looking at things. I said, well, how does it feel right that you honor somebody but you make them pay for their own medal, right?
Mhm.
Because um, the medals have actually increased in price since the time we started this project.
Yeah.
We
Mhm.
the same medal that we you see behind me, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I can show you the real one here.
Mhm.
But the same medal that in the case that we purchased for the veterans, that was like $60. I don't know if you can see that, kind of, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's this same medal with the case was about $65 when we first bought it.
Mhm.
Uh, has now increased in price to like $200.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's like a fourfold increase. I mean, you talk about inflation. I mean, that's crazy.
Right.
So, so that's one of the other things we decided to do was try to raise funds so that no veteran or their family would have to pay for the medal. It just doesn't make any sense for us
Right.
to do things like that. Although other groups are doing it that way now,
Mhm.
because no one can really sustain having to pay $200 for each medal.
Right.
Um, so anyway, we're happy about that. And currently we've registered just shy of 3,600
Oh, wow.
veterans across the country who are there. And of that number, I want to say probably close to 200 are still living.
Mhm.
So you can see there's not very many more that are still alive. And I think here in Houston we have maybe about five that are
Mhm.
still alive. So still a pretty good number in a sense.
Right. Right.
But that's 3,600 out of what, about 20,000. So that's we're still you know it's all, it would be impossible to find them all because a lot of them, you can imagine, either were single or they stayed single, didn't marry afterwards,
Mhm.
or they just lost track of them. No one knows where they are, you know, and some may have moved back to China. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, and the difficult part about this too, Sarah, this project was how do you contact these individuals?
Right.
Most people in their 90s are not on any kind of social media, right?
Right. Right.
And the people who are their children, they're people of my age in their 60s and 70s. So how many of them are really actively engaged on social media? So you say, okay, let's talk about how to find World War II veterans. Well, that's even more difficult to do. So yeah, it's been quite a challenge, quite a
Mm.
challenge.
Yeah. So when was the ceremony held for the gold medal?
Well, this was one of the unfortunate things about the pandemic.
Mm.
So in many other cases, we would have had the ceremony in Washington, D.C., the official Congressional Gold Medal ceremony conducted by the Speaker of the House, which at the time and still is Nancy Pelosi. So because we could not have any ceremonies in together in a congregate setting, we ended up having a virtual ceremony, which Speaker Pelosi held December the 9th, 2020, I think it was.
Mhm.
So anyway, or 2019, I guess it was. So anyway, what happened was it's just not the same as
Mm.
being at Emancipation Hall, where you have about 1,000 people, and let's just think about 1,000 Chinese Americans sitting at Emancipation Hall in D.C., and you have both houses of Congress, the majority and minority leaders of both houses of Congress, and major leaders there, sponsors of the bill, addressing 1,000 Chinese Americans, which we were not able to do because of the pandemic, and so I guess that was what I call the official ceremony. So everything was done virtually. Everything from the national anthems to the Pledge of Allegiance to the Speaker Pelosi presenting the medal to our to one of our chosen, Chinese American War II veterans, LCC2. And so after that, when we were finally able to have a ceremony, we finally had one, the official one, September 29th, I think it was, September 29th or 30th, maybe it was 30th, September 30th, at um, at the Crystal Gateway Marriott in Washington D.C. And so we had, it's amazing, we had 700 people come to that ceremony.
Mhm.
And actually, someone told me that was the first major event they've had in Washington D.C. since the pandemic started. So, so we're real happy about that. Everything considered, it worked out well. I mean, you can't be.
Yeah. Okay. And how did it feel, I guess, to be at the ceremony? Were y'all able to invite any veterans to come and be a part of that?
Yeah, we actually had four living veterans that showed up. We originally were thinking we were going to have about 70 or 80 before the pandemic. That's how many that were committed to come. But as
Mm.
it turns out, we only had four, and they were happy to be there. We had some tremendous ceremonies at the World War II Memorial outdoor,
Mhm.
and then we had the ceremony, the presentation ceremonies indoor at the Crystal Gateway Marriott. And I mean, coming out of the pandemic with everybody coming there, everybody was happy. I mean, no
Mm.
one got COVID later,
Yeah.
but everyone was really happy to be there. I mean, it was an event that everyone looked forward to, and I would say that I've never seen so many people in the community happy to be out and about. Number one, and then number two, to finally recognize, even if their dad or mom or aunt, uncle or aunt were no longer alive, the fact
Mhm.
that we were able to recognize them, in this kind of a ceremony, it was really heartfelt and moving. Um, Another interesting thing I found out about at the ceremony was there were people who were friends that knew each other, but didn't know each other was going to be at this event. Because how many times do you talk about your dad being a World War II veteran? You
Right.
don't. When you're growing up, you don't. No one, dad doesn't talk about it, and the kids don't know about it. And it wasn't until later, they found out that their dads were World War II veterans. Well, even then, you know it, but you don't share it with anybody necessarily because it's not a big topic of conversation, right? No, yeah, my dad was a World War II veteran. Okay, big deal. So I think the fact of the matter is, all these people end up seeing each other that didn't know each other was going to be there, but they
Mm.
found out another common bond with each other that they had dads and moms and uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters who served in World War II. So I mean that's another real nice thing about how we brought people together through this project effort as well to to kind of recognize this. So a lot of really nice things happening because this is a generation of men and women, the parents who were never recognized much for what they did, because most of them toiled in anonymity, right? I mean, as soon as they got out of the war, they came back, uh, found a career, worked, studied, where they and some took advantage of the GI Bill, came, started a career, got married, had kids, et cetera, and went on and on. Many of them, I say success. Define how they wanted to define success as far as how their family and their life went. And I would say most of these men and women that we talked to who served have no regrets. They many of them have said to me themselves. They said this is despite what you might hear today about some of the rhetoric, um, no one in that age group in that generation said to me they hate this country. They all say they love this country. They would
Mhm.
not be anywhere else had not been for the
Right.
things that they were given the opportunity to do. So yeah,
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah. Sounds like a very special moment for them.
Oh, for everybody. It's special for everybody. Really,
Mhm.
really is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see that you were also involved with the Congressional Gold Medal Design Liaison Team.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
how was it? Yeah. How was it a part to be a part of that?
This is I've learned so many things. I've been a STEM person all my life, so I got to tell you, finding out more about history is very interesting to me at this point in my
Mhm.
life. But um, I'll tell you the smartest things. One of the smartest things I've ever done was to appoint this Gold Medal Design Committee. Everybody on the committee except for me is a military person.
Mhm.
So what's my thinking there? Well, my thinking is if you opened up this thing for input from the public, you'd have 10 million opinions on how this medal
Right.
should be designed.
Right.
But I
Mhm.
said to myself, well, who knows the work and effort of the military people, especially Chinese Americans, than another Chinese American officer, right? So everybody on the committee is a Chinese American,
Mhm.
what they call a general officer. So a general officer means someone who has rank.
Mhm.
So there's rear admirals in the Navy as well as 1 and 2 star generals who are part of this committee. And the committee was led by Major General Robert Lee, and so he had experience in designing the medal, so he knew how to work with the Mint, and so that part made it so easy. I said, that's the best thing I've ever done. Is that if anyone has a question or a problem with how the military medal was designed, I would say go talk to General Lee. You
Mhm.
have a problem, go talk to General Lee.
Yeah.
So you always go back to the people who know the most about it
Mhm.
because who knows more about it? I mean, otherwise, us civilians would have been designing things all over the place. We put in goofy
Right.
stuff, which kind of is an interesting thing in itself. So, how did we get to where we were? Well, actually, how the Mint does their work is this: they actually have commissioned artists
Mhm.
and sculptors on their staff,
Wow.
and so each was given a narrative that we wrote about the story, about what we thought Chinese Americans did during World War II. Their job was to read our narrative, go back and give us a design based upon that story, and just using their visual techniques and all that kind of thing, artistic
Right.
everything. They came up with design. So we had I think a dozen designers, and each one submitted a obverse and a reverse of the medal.
Mhm.
So you get to choose between maybe you like the obverse of one artist, maybe the reverse of another's,
Mhm.
that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So between all of those submissions, there were some that we eliminated pretty easily. Then
Mhm.
there were others we refined on and worked through. And as you see, what's behind me is what we ended up with.
Mhm.
And I would that say, I mean, like I said, I'm a STEM person, but I was pretty impressed with how everything worked itself out.
Mhm. Yeah.
But we had some very interesting designs, Sarah. I mean, you had flowery lays on some of the
Oh,
designs. You had People think so. So it's not exactly. We didn't start off with something like as cool and as pretty, spot on as these two images. So, but as it turns out, actually the artist who submitted um, the obverse and the reverse was the same person.
Mhm.
so so we didn't argue too much about that. And then they also have a sculptor that is the person who creates the sculpture part of it. And I don't know if you can tell, but on the I think on the reverse side of the metal, there are uh, two sets of initials, one of the artist and one of the um, sculptor. So, but yeah, it's just extremely interesting process. So yeah, every now and then we'd have to go to Washington D.C., look and review at all the submissions, and yeah, we had a good. That was one of the interesting parts about the design of the medal.
Yeah, I know the final design is very striking. I think it's very.
Yeah, it's amazingly beautiful, and like I said, it captures just about everything that you could say. So if you ever get a chance to read the narrative of the story, and I think that's the most important part. Unless you read the narrative, you don't really understand what all the things are about if you're not a military person, because you can't. You kind of see the military uniforms are a little bit different,
I see.
but you don't know which ones are which, right? If I give you a test right now, can you tell me which ones are which?
I think I think the one in the back is that the air
Yeah,
the yeah
the helmet, right?
yeah
And the guy next to him is pretty easy. He's Army. He's got that,
yeah
he's got his.
yeah
Of course, you can tell the nurse. Whoops.
yeah, and then navy I guess on the left side, but the is that the navy?
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
right. Which one's the Merchant Marine?
The one on the right side, maybe the one that's closest,
Um, let's see. If you're looking at it, let's see. Okay, let's look at the nurse. How far away from the nurse is the one
right
Merchant
next
Marine?
to the nurse, in front of
Nope.
the nurse. Oh, um, I'm not too sure on this one.
Look at who's holding the steering wheel.
Oh, the person next to the Air Force.
Right, right.
Right,
That's
right.
that's that's the Merchant Marine guy, and you also tell because he's wearing the wool cap.
Oh,
He
right, right.
doesn't really have a helmet. And but back in those days, the Merchant Marines actually were not a branch of the military.
Oh, right. Mhm.
If you think about all the work that they did, most of them were responsible for the transport of munitions, supplies,
Mhm.
food, etc., usually unescorted across the Pacific and
Oh,
across
wow.
the
Yeah,
Atlantic. So if they were able to, if the enemy were able to find the supply ships, that would pretty much, knock out
right,
quite a bit of your
right,
logistics there. So
right.
yeah,
Significant contributions as well.
a huge contribution. Yeah, and people don't recognize that. And we had 40 merchant marines in who are
Mhm.
Chinese American. So and the funny thing about that is um, the merchant mariners also received their own congressional gold medal last
Mhm.
last year.
Oh,
Last year.
wow. Pretty
So
recent.
so those guys are double awardees. They get two congressional gold medals.
Right, right. Mhm. Right. Yeah, okay. So I guess my final question
Mhm.
is the Chinese American World War II Veterans Recognition Project, is it still active or do they
Yeah,
have any like future projects?
yeah. I think right now the last thing we're trying to do is locate those individuals who did not come to the ceremony, who actually registered and were approved
Mm,
by the project to receive a medal, but because of either COVID schedules, that kind of stuff, they did not come to a ceremony. And so we're trying to contact them to see if they're still interested in receiving the medal. If they are, we're going to be able to ship it to them,
mm,
but we'll see. But the long-term goal of the project actually is to continue talking about the story. Um, I don't want to be so ambitious to say that this could get into curriculum, school curriculums, K through 12, or even Asian American studies or things like that. Although that would be a nice objective. I don't know that. The problem with that is we're always going to face, other groups that have bigger stories, larger populations, the whole thing. Hispanic, uh, African American studies, all those groups are much, you know, there's there's probably 10 times more Hispanic in Texas than there are Asian Americans,
Mhm.
and African Americans probably at least maybe 4 times more. And so their stories are also compelling, just as ours are. But I think it's important at least to maybe instill some of the interest in our own group, because if you don't know about your own group, you know what are you going to advocate for? I mean, where do you fit? Where do you say you fit? Well, part of the
Mhm.
problem is most Chinese or Asian Americans don't know where they fit because they don't know enough about their own history here in the U.S.
Mhm.
Because as somebody said before, everyone's history is American history. It's just not because your ethnicity makes it different.
Right.
Because there are
Mhm.
so many similarities, right, in everybody's, uh, I'll say, immigrant story, if you will. Um, but there's also so many differences about how we, were able to not only get here, but also how we're able to struggle and survive and thrive, in our work. So I guess the answer to your question would be, what are we doing from this point forward? Right now, there are a lot of different things they're doing. I'll give you 3 examples right now in Sacramento. For some reason, this thing has taken off quite well. So one group is doing a lot of oral histories. So they still
Mhm.
have quite a few living veterans in Sacramento area. That's one thing they were doing. Another one is doing a project to have various artifacts and memorabilia at the public libraries. So they've gotten together the Sacramento Public Library. So they're going to have exhibits mostly about World War II, the Chinese American World War II effort, in exhibits across the city in Sacramento. And then third group, there's a small group of Chinese in Red Bluff, which is about a couple hours north of Sacramento. And so what they want to do is they had a area in Red Bluff that's mostly Chinese Chinatown, and they're going to put a mural together, and the mural is going to have this metal, the front of the metal, and then they're going to put instead of these faces, they're going to put the faces of the veterans that lived in their city
Oh,
on
that's
that
very
metal.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's pretty cool when you think about it. So, a variety of projects going on, and like I said, one of the major ones that's the most difficult would be trying to get curriculum inside your public school. Who knows? I mean, I don't know how that's going to work.
Mhm.
Uh, I've pretty much had enough legislative work for a while.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing these
You're
stories
welcome.
with us today. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us or anything that I might have missed?
Um, no, I think the main thing is if I were to encourage, not just Chinese Americans your age, but all across the spectrum, is to continue to engage and talk about your communities. You know, not and not just among your own group of friends who are Chinese or Asians, but actually neighbors, others who would really stand to benefit from it. Because most of the people will say, "Oh, I never knew that," right? They'll just you're talking about. I never knew that. So
Mhm.
just try to get the word out more.
Right, right. Mhm. Well, hopefully we can get the word out more with, this interview and other similar things as well.
It'll work. It'll
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Sarah. Take care now.
You
All
too.
right.
Bye.